come on. Get in here out of the cold. Tyr's blessing, man. You look like you've seen a Yeti. Well, better to see death than have it sneak up on you, I suppose. Come on, get by the fire. Who, them? In the corner? Rolled into town today. Lynn said they might be the best thing to happen at 10 Town since that business with the drow fella. I doubt that. Say they're looking for work, though. Wait, where are you going? You can barely walk. Icewind Dale has become trapped in a perpetual winter. Ferocious blizzards make the mountains pass through the spine of the world exceedingly treacherous, and this land has not felt the warmth of the sun in over 2 years. In fact, the sun no longer appears above the mountains, not even in what should be the height of summer. In this frozen tundra, darkness and bitter cold reign as king and queen. Most Dale residents blame Oral the Frost Maiden, god of winter's wrath. The shimmering aurora that weaves across the night sky is said to be her doing, a potent spell that keeps the sun at bay. Dalefolk live in a scattering of settlements known as 10 Towns. The drop-off of caravans coming from the south and travel between the settlements in this never-ending winter has left everyone feeling isolated. Although each town has resolved to appease the Frost Maiden with sacrifices of one kind or another, no respite from the winter's fury seems forthcoming. For adventurers such as yourselves, 10 Towns is a place to test one's mettle and, in the spirit of heroes who have come before, leave one's mark on this frigid, blighted land. Hey y'all, and welcome to my brand new series covering Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden. In this series, we're going to be covering a lot of the stuff in the book, the other things that I'm super excited about running in this campaign. It's going to be kind of a mix of edited content like you're seeing now and like you're seeing in the start here, and some of just my like free form rambling. Some of it I'll be on script, a lot of it I'm sure I won't be as I get on tangents and rants and whatnot. But I'm super excited about this book. Hey y'all, welcome to the first episode of my new series covering Rime of the Frost Maiden, Icewind Dale, the somewhat new adventure that's been put out by Wizards of the Coast. I intend to go through every chapter and section of the book in separate videos throughout the series, talk about kind of what's provided, what I plan to add in or take out. We'll also be going over some NPCs, how I plan to voice them, what I kind of tend to their attitudes to be. But before we dive into everything, my name is Ryan, aka Pariahdox. I also have my Let's Play content that's here on this channel, kind of mixing things up a little bit with some D&D stuff, because man, I do love this game. I've been playing D&D for about 4 years. I've previously, just kind of was just a player and a hardcore like content consumer, watching all the YouTube videos and everything. But I truly fell in love with DMing when I started DMing Curse of Strahd 2 years ago. Played through the entirety of Curse of Strahd with my group, and it was super fun. Played with a lot of additions and a lot of stuff kind of like chopped up and mixed around, remixed for my players. I plan on DMing Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden for the same group, a total of 3. So it'll be me and then 3 players, bringing a lot of things I learned from Curse of Strahd into this campaign, and also a lot of things I've picked up from the Discord, the Rime of the Frost Maiden Discord that I'm a part of, the subreddit, other YouTube videos, a bunch of other content that people have been really putting together. I'm going to be looking to put some of that together and kind of walk through what I plan on doing as I'm prepping the campaign. So I think it'll be a lot of fun to sort of have an extra outlet to talk about the things that I'm doing. As far as this series, I plan on keeping this first episode relatively spoiler free. I'll be going over like I said, what I'm excited about the book, some of the rules that I plan on using, as well as some of the options from this book, and also some of the options from Tasha's that I plan on using, and other books such as the DMG, because all of my players will have access to all of the rules, obviously, and also certain information on like backgrounds of 10 Towns and stuff like that. So I'll be doing my best to keep this episode spoiler free and kind of go over some of the things that we'll be talking about moving forward and my general like thoughts about the book. So the first thing to cover as we're kind of going through our book here, pardon the camera transition, we have our little intro here, some wonderful art. I actually ended up with a slight misprint here with some ink, looks like it got splashed on. The big thing that we're going to be looking at the start here is actually not in the adventure flow, although the adventure flow section is pretty good. We're actually going to be looking at these wilderness survival rules. The wilderness survival rules, I feel like, are going to be very important and very integral to the campaign. As I will mention in a later section, I have a player who's very interested in doing the wilderness survival thing and kind of leaning into that aspect of like having the wilderness be a bad guy in the campaign. So these rules are going to be very, very important in my prep at the very least. It says here, the wilderness survival, the following rules come into play as the characters explore 10 towns. There's some rules about avalanches, which I think are very good. The rules on avalanches I enjoy a lot because they're so extreme that it leaves a little bit of room for potentially a player character who has enough, who's powerful enough or has enough strength or is fast enough to actually like outrun an avalanche or do these cool things, but they're so extreme that it doesn't actually it's not reasonable in a lot of cases. And we'll see here that a typical avalanche is 300 feet wide, 150 feet long, and 30 feet thick. It moves twice each round. On initiative counts 10 and 0. Avalanche travels 300 feet, so that's 600 feet total in a round. A ridiculous traveling pace. We have some basic rules about the players having to make strength saving throws or take certain amounts of damage on a failed save. The avalanche will stop, the snow will settle, and creatures inside it will suffer exhaustion every 5 minutes. There's a lot of things that play with exhaustion in this, including in your travel times and in cold weather things in general that'll play with the exhaustion mechanic. I think it's very cool because there's a lot where it's like if you neglect, like if you get wet or you neglect to take care of the condition that you're currently in, it'll actually like compound on itself. If you're trapped in the avalanche, you get trapped, you're trying to make these saves to get out, but you're taking exhaustion as you're trying to dig yourself out. Maybe it's a DC 15 strength athletics check in order to break out and try to dig yourself up to the surface. Creature that is not restrained or incapacitated can spend 1 minute freeing another creature. So if some of the party fails their save and some of them make it and don't get buried, then they can help out the rest of the party. Blizzards are another really cool one. Blizzards are going to happen very, very often as you're rolling on the chart. I think that the last time I had read the rules as written, blizzards and avalanches basically occur once a day as the party is traveling. Probably going to play a little bit lighter on that. Kind of depends on how things go. Blizzards are also often accompanied by creatures and random encounters. You can actually see some really wonderful art here of a Yeti. You see some pretty great art of a Yeti that is stalking his prey in the winter. Also makes it easier for the party to veer off of course, and also makes it impossible for creatures to fly because they'll get knocked prone every round if they're trying to fly in a blizzard, if they don't have a hover speed, that is. The next section here is going to be actually another very key one, the extreme cold rules. There's some more rules that appear in the Dungeon Master's Guides, but they're repeated here for your convenience, which I think is a really great thing that they did, kind of bringing some of the DMG stuff into Icewind Dale. They for people who don't have that book, because I know a lot of people don't. We actually are lucky enough to have a copy of it here, but a lot of people don't bother buying the DMG because they kind of use online resources instead. But the DC 10 con save at the end of each hour or gain a level of exhaustion if you're in the extreme cold. That's honestly pretty tame. The big thing that I love is that creatures with immunity to cold damage, with resistance or immunity to cold damage, automatically succeed on this saving throw. So if you have resistance to cold damage, for instance, if you are playing a Goliath with the new changes that they made in the book, you'll actually have this really interesting thing where you can be light armored or you can be lightly covered. You could wear swim trunks or you could wear like summer clothes. There's a couple of things that you always have this aesthetic of these like Goliath barbarians, like bare chested and tatted up and all of that, and they aren't ever wearing like cold weather gear. And that's because, as we find out here, if you have resistance to cold damage, you don't suffer the effects of the extreme cold. And worth noting, the temperatures in Icewind Dale are around negative 49 degrees Celsius, which is about negative 45 degrees, negative 49 Fahrenheit. which is about negative 45 Celsius. Wind chill can lower those temperatures as much as 80 degrees, which basically puts it as being equivalent to the Antarctic or the North Pole kind of levels of coldness that we're talking about. We have some rules here for fishing for knucklehead trout. Knucklehead trout fishing is a fun little side activity that players can do. There's a couple of tie-ins and quests and other things that are throughout the book that have to do with knucklehead trout. One of the big things about knucklehead trout is that they're deceptively hard to catch. Players have to basically, once they make their survival check to catch the trout or like do the fishing thing, they will actually have to do a contested strength check with the knucklehead trout. And if they fail, the trout can actually pull them into the water, at which point they start suffering the effects of the frigid water. But the wrestling with the knucklehead trout is kind of a thing that can make those sort of encounters deceptively deadly, because the frigid water rules are very intense and can easily kill a player. And it's actually a tip from a fellow DM on the subreddit that I received the other day that was basically, if your character gets wet, they're dead. And that, I enjoy that for the most part. Hopefully there's some resources that'll help mitigate that or help those players, but it's understandable. There's a rule that was one of the homebrew rules that I'm probably going to be implementing is actually a cold shock rule for when you do get submerged in water. And basically what it equates to is a DC 5 constitution check. And if they fail the check, then they immediately start, as opposed to having to wait to be in the water for an extended period of time to start having to make checks and potentially failing them or succeeding them. If they fail this check, then they will immediately start suffering the ill effects of the cold water. The DC 5 is actually a very cool one, in my opinion, because it puts it at a level where, for majority of the game, for majority of class and majority of players, you'll fail that if you roll a natural 1, but otherwise you will succeed. So it's kind of this, like, you are just exceptionally unprepared. In general, I tend to play with crit fails and crit successes even on skill checks, even though there's a lot of, wishy-washiness on whether or not people want to play with that. Actually, just recently learned of a rule in a game called Mutants and Masterminds where they do a lot of degrees of success and degrees of failure. And the rule that we can kind of steal from that to put into our D&D games is the rolling a natural 20 doesn't immediately say that you succeed on a skill check, but what it does is it adds a degree of success, an extra bonus or equivalent of like a +5 to the roll, which is kind of how they equated it in that D20 system, which I thought was very cool. Basically, if you roll a natural 1, you'll have a lot less ability your body will be thrown into shock, and you'll have a lot less ability to actually fight off the cold water and get yourself back up if you don't have help, which is why it's important to bring people fishing with you, more than just their company. The rules for frigid water are the same as in the Dungeon Master Guide. They're also repeated again. It reads that a creature can be immersed in frigid water a number of minutes equal to its constitution score before suffering any ill effects. Each additional minute spent in frigid water requires a creature to make a DC 10 con save or gain 1 level of exhaustion. Creatures with resistance or immunity to cold damage automatically succeed on the saving throw, as do creatures that are naturally adapted to living in ice cold water. So you're going to be thinking about a lot of aquatic animals don't automatically succeed on this. One thing that I believe is of note that I think talks about it in possibly here it is, actually under the note for the fishing for knucklehead trout. If you're a character who gets pulled out of water, is dripping wet, and continues to suffer the effects of the frigid water until the wet clothes are taken off and replaced with dry ones, which makes you're taking the frigid water rolls, but then you have to take off of your clothes and dry them for an extended period of time before you can put them back on. Meanwhile, you're going to be suffering the effects of the extreme cold. So it's really like it can compile on itself very quickly, just like it can in real life survival situations. As far as illumination, as long as the everlasting rime lasts, natural light in Icewind Dale is never brighter than dim. In normal, non-blizzard condition, twilight extends from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Icewind Dale is otherwise dark, and until orals April's aurora or the moon appears across the night sky. This is kind of something that is shared with Curse of Strahd. There's no sunlight in this campaign. There can be certain like weather spells and things like that can produce sunlight, but in this campaign it's dark. It's only the sun is only ever shining, quote unquote, during about 4 hours during the day. And so your characters, if they don't have things like dark vision, if they don't have ways of dealing with it being dark all the time, are going to be at a pretty severe disadvantage. I've made sure to let my players know this, because going in and building a character that potentially you could have a character that's from Icewind Dale or has moved to Icewind Dale because of their sunlight sensitivity. For instance, Drizzt was a very famous drow who lived in Icewind Dale. Of course, he didn't live during the Rime, but it is dark more often than not, even without the Rime happening. So it's kind of one of those things that the players would know and they can kind of take into account when they're making their characters. As far as Overland Travel, we're just going to skim through this part really quickly. Basically, with no extra gear, no snowshoes, no dogs or anything like that. It takes about 4 hours to traverse a mile in Icewind Dale during Overland Travel. You can cut that time in half if you have snowshoes. You can cut it in half again to travel 1 mile an hour if you have a dog sled. There's the options of dog sleds, and there's also axe-beak sleds, which can become available to the characters in certain circumstances. And it's one of those things where the dog sled mechanic, I think, might need a little bit of tuning, in my opinion. The dog sleds, I believe, every hour that they travel, they have to rest for an hour. So basically, they're more of like mules, or like they're more for carrying things, which actually brings me to a good point. If we check this guy out here, in our DMGs, there's actually some rules for slippery ice and thin ice that we can go over while we're here. Slippery ice is difficult terrain. When a creature moves into slippery ice for the first time on a turn, it must succeed on a DC 10 dexterity acrobatics check or fall prone. Thin ice is much more deadly. The thin ice has a weight tolerance of 3d10 times 10 pounds per 10-foot square area. The way that maths out is if you get a couple of characters, you're almost guaranteed to start rolling to or getting to an area where you're going to be breaking the ice. If you have multiple characters like tied directly next to each other within 5 feet, there's a lot of cases where even one character or one person without gear could break this ice as well. And that could be a very, very deadly circumstance for your players. So it's going to be something that we're going to want to watch out for. And while I don't play with super strict encumbrance rules, I think that keeping an eye on how much your players generally weigh is going to be important. It's also important to let them know that that is a thing that's going to happen. That way they can have that foreknowledge, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but they can players can have that foreknowledge of, okay, I know that before I walk onto ice, I need to take off some of my gear because I don't want to weigh 500 pounds even though I can carry 500 pounds, I don't want to weigh that much when I'm walking on this thin ice because I don't want to get wet because I don't want to die. Travel is very similar. It's the area where the avalanches start coming into effect a lot more. The Spine of the World or the Slopes of Kelvin's Cairn, which we'll be able to look at a map later. But at the end of each hour, to choose a leading person or an NPC, they make a DC 15 survival check. On a success, an hour's journey was not hindered. On a fail, the party comes to an impasse and must backtrack, which usually just costs them the hour, which can really extend the amount of time that people are traveling by quite a lot if they start failing these checks rapidly. And if the check fails by 5 or more, once again, the degree of failure, which I really enjoy, then an avalanche is triggered 2d6 times 100 feet above the character's head. So basically, it was only ever going to be a couple of rounds away, because remember, those avalanches move at about 600 feet per round, so that's quite a lot. We have some really good stuff, some pronunciation guide on this page, as well as some character hooks for backstories, which we're not going to go over in super depth right now, but it is very good that they really try to get your characters to feel like they belong and feel like they want to be here, because at the end of the day, it's cold in Icewind Dale and it sucks. It is not a fun place to be, but people are going to be here and your characters need to want to be here. So that's when kind of like talking with your characters and giving them little hooks into the campaign wherever you can, that's going to be the biggest kind of like driving thing, because otherwise they'll just try to leave. And one of the things I learned
by playing Curse of Strahd is what you don't want your character's biggest motivation to be leaving, because if that happens, it really takes a lot, like saps a lot of the fun out of the exploration and the things that are happening. When all they want to do is fight the big bad guy and get out of here, they miss out on a lot of the things that are going to be happening in the campaign. That's it for the wilderness survival rules. Of course, we also have our other rules that are in the DMG as far as wilderness survival, and there is also here in Tasha's, there's this rule set for magical realms that they don't have a explicitly icy one, but I think that you can really take the effects that are listed here and the way that this is kind of put out, and you can move it into Icewind Dale very easily. Something that I plan on doing, and I plan on actually drawing up a chart for this eventually. But basically what it is an area that's been so steeped in magic or so steeped in whatever natural phenomenon is happening that anytime something triggers it, then it will do a random effect, which is listed on this like D100 table. For instance, if you're in a haunted house, like on this page, anytime someone is alone or anytime someone is feeling scared or has a frightened condition, if midnight or 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, like the bells chime and a creepy thing happens, then that's the trigger and you roll on the chart. If anyone, for instance, some ideas for what you could do in a cold version, something in Icewind Dale, someone tries to light a fire, if someone takes off their clothes, if someone is subjected to a level of exhaustion due to extreme cold, those kind of things can, because this area is so magically infested with or imbued with the cold energy, it can actually change the properties of the land so that when these certain things happen, other things will kind of fall onto them. Like if someone fails a perception check by a certain amount while being blinded by a blizzard, there might be a Yeti encampment nearby that suddenly knows where they are and are magically like pinged to the party's location or something like along those lines, where something, even just like creepy things can happen. For instance, on the infested one, like the ground opens up beneath one random creature, creating a quicksand pit. So something with like ice breaking or anything like that, they could fall on, or they could stumble across a sheet of black ice, and now nothing major happened there, but it still reinforces that the nature and the environment is constantly there and constantly trying to get at them as one of the main bad guys of the story. So there's some of the extra rules in Tasha's. There's actually another section in Tasha's that I'm very interested in using, that is the sidekicks rules. The sidekicks, I think, are super well done. There's also versions of sidekicks that are available from Matt Colville. One of my friends, I believe one of my roommates, actually has strongholds and followers. It kind of depends on how things go in the campaign. I don't really think that they're interested in building a stronghold, but the followers rules can be really, really great to use, because especially when we're playing with such a small party, when I only have 3 people, it could be easily like the party doesn't have a rogue, or the party doesn't have like a arcane spellcaster, or these things can happen really easily, because of course I don't want to limit them on what they're going to play. So that's where the followers and the sidekicks can really come in, even if it's just a dog companion that's a fighter or something along those lines, or if it's a kobold that knows how to pick locks and detect magic or something like that. Those sidekicks can really come in handy to round out the party. One of the things that I do want to be very careful about with this, though, is I had an experience in Curse of Strahd where I had Irina with the party for an extended period of time, but I didn't have enough prepped for her as a person, as a personality. So she kind of fell really flat with the party. The party didn't enjoy her being around very much. And because of that, she was like put into this spiral, this just like doom spiral of I am not able to interact with the party to make her more endearing, because the party doesn't want to interact with her, but she's like necessary for the campaign. So she has to be around, and the party is keeping her around because they know that she's necessary, and they know that she's at least useful. My intention with her and with sidekicks is by no means to have a DMPC. It's by no means to like have any sort of like self-insert power or anything. For the most part, I'm actually planning on having their actions and their personality quirks determined by the players and then played out by me. So that way it'll feel a lot less DMPC-ish. Obviously, in most cases, they're also not going to be combatants as well. So they're going to be kind of someone that the party has to take care of, which I think is going to be an interesting dynamic, and it's something that we'll elaborate on later as we get into this series and as I kind of start brainstorming on specific things that might be. I'm of the opinion that Session 0 is pretty necessary for almost any campaign, but especially for Icewind Dale. As DMs, we have to be able to set expectations to work around the player's wants and needs, such as trigger items, because there being a somewhat horror-themed book, this is going to have certain aspects that players might be very uncomfortable with. You have to make sure that you know those when you're going in. Luckily, me and my players have been playing together for an extended period of time, and we also played through a similar campaign as far as theme goes, as far as like the horror theme goes with Curse of Strahd. So we've already had a lot of these conversations. Going over a lot of stuff on Session 0, there's a lot of other content in Tasha's and also in other D&D YouTubers who have gone over a lot of what you can do in a Session 0 and what you can expect out of. We're going to keep it kind of more brief here. We're not going to have this whole video being about Session 0, obviously. But so far what we've done, I've told my players for this campaign not to work on their characters until we roll for the character secrets, which we will cover later. But the character secrets are important to the campaign, and they're important to the way that I want to run the campaign, so I want to work with them, but I also want my players to know that these player secrets might change things about their characters. And I'm not going to do my best not to spoil any of the actual player secrets, but for instance, there are some that perhaps you'll have to be a certain race in order to have this secret, and I don't want them to have a like fully fleshed out like orc barbarian and they get some secret that they really like and think is really cool and want to play with it, but then they have to completely scrap this character they were super excited about. Just introducing that kind of conflict when in their character creation, not something I'm super interested in doing. So I wanted my players to not work on their characters until after we rolled for the secrets, which I think is pretty important for this campaign. I plan on rolling these secrets before we do the actual session 0. Reasoning behind that is my player group is very focused on, my group loves character creation, and I do as well, and we all really love leaning into just like, really digging into our characters' backstories and stuff like that. So having to pump the brakes on that kind of feels bad for a lot of people. But I think that it's best for the overall health of the campaign that we can kind of set these expectations at the start so that they're not like getting too far ahead of themselves and planning out all of these things that end up having characters that potentially like go against, like bump heads with things that are going to be big themes in the campaign. I've also given my players Google Documents that each have their own Google Documents page on top of having one overarching one for rules and other things like that. The point of doing this is something new that I'm trying out, where because I'm going to have potentially a couple players be from the 10 towns and from the surrounding region, I can kind of I can feed them information so that they don't run into a situation where they have to ask me constantly like, hey, do I know this place? Do I know this person? Do I know how this thing works? I live here my entire life, but do I know these things? Instead of having to have me give them that information on the fly, I can write up that information in a Google Doc and use a lot of copy pasted information from like the Wikipedia and from the book itself to kind of feed them into things, and of course doing some slight edits to keep book spoilers out from the Wikipedia articles because there are spoilers in there. But for the most part, like history and the way that things are kind of going right now, NPCs that are in the town are definitely things that I'm excited for my players to actually know going into the sessions. So like I said, there's tons of resources on what you would like to get out of a session 0, but my big main goals are to establish boundaries, mainly around triggers, graphic content, and horror content, and the sort of duality between helplessness and heroism that you have to do trying to do horror in D&D. And we'll probably talk a lot more about horror in D&D moving forward. However, the big things that we also want to take into account, not only things that players don't want in their campaign, but also things players do want in their campaign. I have a particular player who's very interested in playing in a campaign where the environment is a bad guy, finally playing in a campaign where he feels challenged by the things that are happening naturally in the environment. And so now I know as a DM that that's something that I can safely play into, and also it's something that I should play into because it's something that player wants wants to experience. I also would like to go over what kind of content to expect, mostly because the Rime of the Frost Maiden is not Curse of Strahd. There's not necessarily the Frost Maiden herself, while she is an antagonist, is not the only thing that's going on in this campaign. So I want my players to know that there's going to be a decent amount of like sandboxy, open world, like traveling around the 10 towns, but there's also going to be dungeons. There's also going to be, you know, all of the nice D&D tropes that you're going to have in here they're D&D tropes and they're great, but I want my players to not go too heavily into one field or another, or like expect to never want to like play a rogue or anything like that, because you're never going to be in a dungeon. You're never going to need to pick locks or anything. You're going to be in dungeons. You're going to need to pick locks. You're going to need all that stuff. So potentially, if that's something that players want to base their characters around, you know, you can play into the whole Frost Maiden bit, but you could also not, and your character will still have a place in the world. I want to be able to start brainstorming ideas for characters. It's a great time to get all the players together if they want to flesh out any like relationships that they have with each other previously, or they're like, yeah, I want to be from 10 towns, I don't want to be from 10 towns. It lets them be prepared for each other's characters, as well as letting me be prepared for the campaign in general. The last thing that I wanted to cover sort of in my initial preparation phase here, when we're still very decent ways out, and we are still working things out. But as far as the conclusion of this sort of like non-spoiler one, I made the decision to allow my players to be from Icewind Dale, which I know from what I've seen, there's kind of a 50-50 split on DMs who either don't care or really, really don't want this and don't want to allow it in your campaign. So I kind of wanted to give my thoughts on it. I think that the player characters being from Icewind Dale can really add to their experience here, because there's some situations where you can't really be all that attached to things just off like random surface encounters that you're having in a campaign. There's a lot of situations where NPCs can be very endearing, but one of the big ways to get someone to care about an area is have them be from that area and have them want things there and have them have lived a life there. A lot of the secrets also can kind of imply that the characters have spent a decent amount of time. The Rime has been happening for 2 years. It is possible to get into Icewind Dale, just mostly nearly impossible to get out of Icewind Dale. So my thinking generally is, I mentioned earlier that I'm planning on using the Google Docs in order to give my players information about the areas that they're in, but I also want to iterate to them that travel between the 10 towns is not something that's incredibly common. For the most part, unless you're doing something specific for trade or specifically for events, people will go to Brainstorming, for instance, because it's the biggest town in 10 towns. But for the most part, people aren't going to be knowing individuals and knowing like intricate goings on in other towns, and that will kind of leave some of the mystery of the area to like them to still be able to discover, while they're also still attached to the area. They're going to know who the speakers are, but they're not necessarily going to know, is the speaker of Brainstorming just like a drunk, or is there something else going on, or they're not going to know recent events that have been happening in the 10 towns. So there's still going to be some of that mystery that's happening there. But I think that having them be from Icewind Dale is a really cool sort of like character intro. And also I think that a lot of the secrets that we're not going to cover in this episode, because obviously it's going to have a lot of spoilers in it. I'm not going to cover it in this episode. However, the secrets are wonderful and I enjoy them a lot. And I think more is the merrier with the secrets, but I feel like a lot of them actually can imply your character being from the Icewind Dale or being here for an extended period of time. So it's important to think about, even if your characters aren't from Icewind Dale, it's important to think about what they know and what they might know and sort of things like that. It's similar to playing anything in the Forgotten Realms, where your characters know who all of the gods are for the most part. They might not know all of them by name or anything like that, but your characters probably have a fairly good idea, because it's something that's important to people in these settings. And it's something that's important to people to know how to survive during the winter. That's why I'm going to provide the winter survival tools to them right at the start so that they know what those are and they can even potentially build around those in their character design. Overall, I generally think that talking to your players is a more is more situation. I think that there's a lot of situations where DMs can be really caught up in like wanting to have a surprise or wanting to have a big twist or a big finale, or like in my instance, I'm really into big cinematic moments in my DMing. I really want those big cinematic things and those big like drama conflict moments to happen, but you can't force them. The situations when you can, it's not necessarily a forcing thing. You have to get consent from your players and you have to talk to them. For instance, when I was playing Curse of Strahd, I actually had the dark secrets in Curse of Strahd, which are somewhat similar to the secrets in this book, except with a little bit more oomph behind them. I also homebrewed them pretty heavily to give them a lot more meaning in the campaign. I got actually all of my players to accept their dark gifts, but the crux of it was a conversation I had with one of my players, or actually two of my players, where one of them, I knew that he as a person wants his character to have a big reveal of like being a lich or being an immortal thing, right? So I offered him the Book of Vile Darkness as part of his dark gift, and I talked to him about it out of character and actually went over like what it would mean mechanically, what would happen to his character, the fact that he would no longer have access to his character, would become my NPC as soon as he actually made the deal, actually as soon as he actually did the deed, which was killing Irina at the very end. I had another character who I actually walked up to her and just straight up asked her what kind of story arc she wanted her character to go through, and she told me that she wanted to go through a like fallen angel and then redemption character arc. And that was something that, especially at the stage of the campaign we were in, there was no way we were going to be able to make that happen unless we worked together on that to produce this story for everyone and for ourselves to enjoy. So I really think that people need to be less afraid of ruining players' immersion in those situations, because I think that it'll be more immersive when you can work and tailor the campaign and the things that are happening in the campaign to your players. And you can ask them things like, hey, just so you know, this this event is going to happen, or this thing's going to happen. I think your character is going to have a unique insight here, or your character might have some background knowledge that I can't give to everyone, but I'm going to give it to you here now. Don't just make sure you don't do the awful thing and metagame around the situation, right? But you can let people know what's about to happen to them so that they can be mentally prepared to react in their character's head, because it's hard to act outside of yourself and it's hard to be improv all the time. So sometimes giving people a little bit of extra time to actually think through those things before you put it out there for your characters to react to can be really good and can be really healthy for your table. So I highly recommend more transparency as opposed to less. Obviously, I'm not going to be showing them any of my creature stat blocks. These are the Chwingas, by the way. I do love them. I'm not going to be like sending them PDFs of my creature stat blocks, but what I am going to do, I'm going to tell them that there's going to be Dweger in this campaign, and they're going to know that, and they're going to potentially be able to build something into their backstory around that, right? Which is going to make for more interesting storytelling overall at the table. And I think it's really important to kind of have those conversations and have that trust between the players and the DM, that you're just trying to work together and no one is trying to screw each other over. You all have the same goals, to have fun and create a cool story. And I think that working together on some of those things can be really effective in that. It can also be effective in the sense of allowing your big bad guys to monologue. I know a lot of DMs struggle with this, doing it one way or the other, either just mass hold personing your party while you monologue when they, it's a DC 25 to break out or something like that, or something that actually they do in the Drizzt novels that take place in Icewind Dale. Is Drizzt is a very, very sneaky, stealthy, roguish type. So he will sneak onto enemy grounds and listen to them do their evil speech, and then he'll leave and come back with reinforcements usually. So you can actually, if you have a rogue or a stealthy character in your party, you can work with them and you can talk to them and be like, hey, I want to deliver this monologue to the party, but I need your character to get a hint, split from the party, and go off screen this encounter. It's not going to be a combat encounter. You're not going to be assassinating anyone during this encounter. You're going to sneak sneak in, you're going to experience this monologue, and you're going to sneak out. There might be some complications along the way. We'll do some dice rolling, we'll play the game, obviously, but you can kind of use this back and forth between you and your players to set up these scenes that can give really cool cinematic moments to the game and all. And that's what I play for the most part. I love character creation. I love these big cinematic reveals and the big cinematic moments. Like Curse of Strahd was full of them, of, you know, just all sorts of spoilery things I'm not going to dive into right away. But like, for instance, my one of my players who stabbed Irina at the end of the campaign, and he murdered Irina in cold blood and used the energy from that evil act to start his transformation into lichdom. So now somewhere in possibly Faerun, you know, maybe showing up in this campaign, who knows, honestly. Probably not showing up in this campaign, because I think he's probably got a couple hundred years under his belt before he hits full lichdom. But there's a goblin lich who has a one glowing yellow eye and a single use of a resurrection spell that he can still use, and he's out there in the world at large somewhere. And that situation would never have happened if I didn't work with that player. I gave them the cue that this would be their last chance to interact with Irina because she was about to leave, and he took that opportunity. I made his wizard dagger deal way more damage than it could have feasibly done, because he was basically just coup de gracing Irina and made her instantly die, and then had him dimension door out. I didn't even realize that he didn't have the spell slots to use to dimension door. So there's some of those things where it's like you can build these scenes and you can build these moments if you work with your players, and if they work with you and are willing to give some of the control over to you to and have that trust between the two of you. For the most part, that's going to be it from me for this episode. I am super excited to be working on this series. It's a lot more work than some of my other series, so I greatly appreciate it if you like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube things, is what YouTube is here to do, as I always say. I'm so incredibly excited to run through this campaign and implement some of the things that I've learned throughout my D&D career, and I'm still actively learning as we're going through. Most likely the format that we'll be doing, I'll be going over some of the 10 towns next, some of the characters and things that are involved in there in the book here, going over also some of the starting quests and some of the options of where to start the players and what kind of hook quests to give them. I have some ideas. I have some bad ideas and probably some good ideas also, so make sure to tune back in unless you are looking to have a spoiler-free experience. If you're looking for no spoilers, this is unfortunately the only episode you're going to be able to watch. And for my players who may also be watching Tibbers, Westfield, and Texas Deviant, do not watch any further, because I will be actively doing campaign prep in these videos and don't want to, you know, ruin everything. I trust you guys to behave. Anywho, thank you all so much for tuning in. I'll have some links to possibly some resources, as well as the Frost Maiden Discord, as well as our own side Discord, where you can reach me personally if you would like to, in the description down below. And that's pretty much going to do it for us here. We'll go ahead and leave off with our little back of the book blurb here. In Icewind Dale, adventure is a dish best served cold. Beneath the unyielding night sky, you stand before a towering glacier and recite an ancient rhyme, causing a crack to form in the great wall of ice. Beyond this yawning fissure, the caves of hunger await, and past this icy dungeon is a secret so old and terrifying that few dare speak it. The mad wizards of the Arcane Brotherhood long to possess that which the god of winter's wrath has so coldly preserved, as do you. What fantastic secrets await? What fantastic secrets and treasures are entombed in the sunless heart of the glacier? And what will their discovery mean for the denizens of Icewind Dale? Can you save 10 towns from the Frost Maiden's everlasting night?